How I wish I could see some of those games this afternoon, but I think I'm going to be speaking. But I'm not in national contention. This morning I got up to have breakfast hotel, and you couldn't have it. There were two teams from Bellevue and others just packed the hotel out. In this time here, I don't have a lot of time. I want to appeal to your minds, and I'll be explaining what you have here before you. There's probably one other person foolish enough in the world to ever do this with something so valuable, so rare, and so unique in history. And so I'm trusting you when I give any instructions if you approach it what to do. This is extremely valuable. And out of 40,000 scrolls they know it exists in the world, they say this is probably the #1 unique scroll. And so my wife and I came in after a long time pursuing it. We got it, and we feel we're caretakers, not owners of it. In the scriptures, it says this: heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. One of the biggest accusations I get from the Old Testament and New Testament is this: hey, look, how do you know that what you have today is what was written down? What people didn't like, they took out. What they did like, they put in. It's changed over the years. Well, I just want to hone in a few minutes on the Old Testament and answer that question with physical evidence before you. This is I call it the Lodz Scroll, after honor of the Jews from Lodz, Poland, who 1 million were killed in the Holocaust. It is 70, only a third of it still has to be rolled out. It's 72 feet long, totally intact. Totally intact. It's made of parchment, sheepskin. And vellum is sheepskin that is real thin. They make smaller items out of vellum usually, and scrolls out of parchment. It has 36 sheets of parchment in it. Some scrolls that go up to 80 different lambskins. The scroll was composed by 4 appraisers, liberal and conservative, totally the exact same day. They even gave it the exact same value, which is, they said, has never happened with another scroll. 1450 A.D. It's about 550 years old. It traces back about 1,600 years of history. It's from the Polish-German border. It's the first complete scroll ever discovered in Poland. It likely was created in a very poor community that could not afford a new scroll. One of the unique things of this scroll, it should have been buried years ago. But because the community was so poor, they couldn't afford a new scroll, and they couldn't afford a full-time scribe. So they never destroyed it. As a result, it contains history that almost no other scroll contains. Because if certain things happen to a scroll, they can't use them anymore. But this community was so small, poor, they had to use it. So one thing they did was, when letters would start to fade, normally the scroll would be taken out, put in a container called the Ganitza. And then when that was full, they were normally buried in graveyards near Torah scholar. This is a Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, complete. But you can see when you look at it, and on the I don't have a monitor, do I? Where is it? You can see the faded letters there. See those faded letters? Well, instead of burying the scroll, they would hire a scribe to come in once a year and re-ink the letters to preserve it. And you can see it, especially down to this end. If I could unroll it more, a lot that would have to be done. It was composed in an area where the Jews suffered so much. I don't know how to explain how this scroll survived, because the overwhelming majority never did from that area of the world, how this scroll survived. For example, it survived the Black Death. When over half the population, about 300 and some million, died from the Black Death. And what happened was, few Jews died from it. So the Europeans blamed the Jews that they launched the Black Death to be able to take over control of Europe. Now, in reality, it looks like what happened was two things. Very few Jews died from the Black Death because of many of the health standards that's even recorded here. And second, because they lived in closed communities. So Black Death didn't invade it like it did all the other communities. But because they were blamed for it, they destroyed the homes of Jews, burned their synagogues, everything. And yet, how did this survive in that very part of the world? It survived the Reformation. You say, what do you mean the Reformation? Well, out of the Reformation came many sincerely believing Christians that thought the Jews killed Jesus. So they were going to kill the Jews. And they went and burned their homes, destroyed their synagogues, everything, and yet this scroll survived. Then it survived the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews, especially in this part of the world, were all killed. They couldn't take their belongings with them or anything. They burned their homes, burned their synagogues, everything. And yet somehow this scroll survived. Through all of that, today that we have a little physical evidence of history. Now, in preparing the skins had to come from a perfect cow, a kosher cow without blemish. And this here is the skin of a calf, like this was out of. Now, it's hard to believe this became that. And you can only write on one side of it, the side where the hair is, not the back side. You can write, but it won't endure. And they had to scrape, soak it in salt water, soak it in lime water, and then they take dog dung often, and they said it was the smelliest job in history. They'd wrap dog dung all over. Why? It softened up the hairs. Then they would scrape, they would stretch it out and scrape the hairs off of it and then sand it. And if you can imagine, that came out of something like this. It's hard to believe. It is so smooth. Then, when they would stretch the skin, normal holes would develop in it. You can see it down there in a number of places. They would stretch out in evenly lined holes. And so they would cut another piece of parchment that size. Now think of this. Some of this was done 600 years ago. And the glue is still solid. They made the glue out of animal fat. Now, they will not write over a patch. Now, they can cut it out. There's several places where they cut it out, put in a patch, and wrote over it. Now, that they can write over. But you'll see here where they'll write around or skip over a patch. Then, you have to understand, when the Jews copied the Scriptures, they not only wanted to accurately copy it, they wanted to accurately interpret it, and they wanted to accurately read it. And they literally built in regulations and everything to guarantee those three things. No other literature of history even comes close to that. And I'll highlight some of those three things today: to copy it accurately, interpret it accurately, and to read it accurately. To help do all of that, they felt that if they had a grid, in other words, the lines were even and everything, instead of normally kind of going up and down when you write freehand and everything, that it'd be easier to copy it accurately and to read it, interpret it accurately. And so what they did, you'll notice down in the end, and every parchment has it, but they folded it over so you can't see it. There's some magnifying glasses down there, because most people in their natural eye, you cannot see these little pinholes like you'll see right here. See those little pinholes? Every single leaf on each end had those pinholes go down, and the entire height of the scroll has the pinholes right down there in the end. Why? On each one, they put these pinholes. Then they put these little pins in them, and they stretched a piece of string from one pin to the next pin. Then they took a dull knife and they scored the text. And you can see a lot of the scoring all through. I mean, perfectly scored. You can see the text. See the scoring there on the text. Now, 3 or 4 of you up here heard you talking, say, well, which side is right side up? One older man said, it's upside down. No, that's Gentile ignorance. It's right side up. Why? You see, if we did a grid, we would write the letters on top of the line. So the even part of the line would be in the bottom. They didn't do that. They hung the letters from the lines. And so therefore, the even part was above the line. Like the lambda and others where the part goes above the line, that would be like the P or the G or the Y going below a perfect line. And so what looks to us upside down is right side up. But every time I roll it out, somebody say, well, it's almost like, McDowell, you dummy, you're rolling it out upside down. No. Hey, I was fooled once by that, but never twice. But most of the pinholes you can't see because they would fold over the edges and glue them and then sew them together with muscles from a calfskin's leg. And most of these go back 500-600 years, still totally intact, and used more than a pulpit Bible would ever dream of being used, this scroll over the years. Then the ink. Most people teach that it's carbon ink, made out of carbon and everything. That usually was not the case because carbon ink would destroy the parchment. So they used a special type ink, and it breaks my heart. I left them in my office. The ink mostly is made out of gall nuts. There is a card over there that has a photograph of gall nuts on it. It looks like this. They're small nuts. These are from Aleppo, Syria. Aleppo gall nuts. Out of these gall nuts come some of the top medicine in the world, the top dyes in the world, and some of the best ink. What? Yeah. When an insect, especially with an oak tree, would place its larvae within, say, a crack or a little crevice in the tree or anything, the tree would react to it. To protect itself, it would start building layers around that larvae until they formed a nut. And then you can pull or snap these nuts off the tree. And then they take and smash them, soak them in water and other chemicals, and out comes an incredible ink. And this is what is interesting. When they did the ink, they only made a small, tiny amount. Probably wouldn't last more than one day. What? Why wouldn't they do a big amount? Save a lot of time. Because they learned this. Fresh ink would last longer. It wouldn't fade as much as they did if they prepared it for like a whole week. Then the ink, in a much shorter period of time, would start to fade. See, they wanted to make sure the ink didn't fade, that you could read it accurately. When the ink did start to fade, they couldn't use the scroll. Except for this one, they'd re-ink it because they could not afford a new scroll. And only a certified scribe could copy a scroll. Now, if you can't imagine this, and I've read probably half the laws. For a scribe to be able to copy the scroll, they have to memorize and know 4,000 laws or regulations just on how to copy the scroll. It's incredible. And they had to have it all from memory to do it because everyone had to be done exactly the same way. Every letter formed the same way in all. With letters, you couldn't just take and scribble out a letter any way you wanted. Every single letter had a certain motion that had to take place to write it. Now just think, there's 304,805 letters in the Torah. Every one carefully done, now get this, with a quill. A feather, mainly of a goose. And not one letter can touch. And think of the blotching with a quill, everything else. Think how many times you've taken a modern ballpoint pen and leave a blotch of ink there, and maybe 2 letters you wrote touch. Then they couldn't use a manuscript. Whoa. In Matthew 5:18, it's a verse pastors have preached on everyone, and I've never had this day anyone explain to me what it means. I think it's amazing. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law until all is fulfilled. In almost 1 year that I've owned this scroll, in a random question, I've never had anyone yet, pastor, seminars, anything, be able to tell me what a tittle is. how in the world, as a pastor, can you preach from this and not illustrate and explain and define a tittle? Or what? Only one person even came close to what a jot is. It says, out of 72 feet, 304,085 letters, not one tittle, not one jot will pass away until all is fulfilled. And here we have probably 1,600-year history, because it was about a 1,000-year-old scroll that this was copied from that takes the history back. A jot is the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It almost looks like a colon or a comma, but it's done a little differently with a little bit going up and down, a little trail on it. But it's a small, there they are right there. Those are jots. The smallest letter, and Jesus said not one jot would disappear from 72 feet until all is fulfilled. Then a tittle is like a little hair going up, and often with a little dark spot on top. Those are tittles. Now, there's no significance to them. They are put there for ornamentation. For ornamentation there. Those are tittles. When you put 5 tittles together, they're called a crown or a tag, T-A-G. And they do that then for emphasis of something. Then put up their slide 61A. You can see, whoops, you got ahead of me there. 61A, yeah. See, those are 9 tittles right there on 3 things, 3 letters. And there's, right below it is a jot. A jot or tittle right there would never pass away. Then you look at the other slide he had just put up. This is the first letter right over there. And it was interesting when somebody came up and said, wow, that's the first letter of the Scriptures. That's a crown on top of the first letter that's made a little larger and a little heavier. Why? That's for emphasis. To a Gentile, it'd mean nothing. To a Jew, the moment they see that, it means stop. You are about ready to read God's sacred message to you. Prepare your heart and prepare your mind before you ever begin just to read it. Then you will see extended, let me go on first. Let me go to the next one. Over here, you have the Song of the Sea, and it's done this way. It always must be done this way. Why? For emphasis. This means pay close attention to what God, Yahweh, wants to say to you here. And so they always do the Song of the Sea this way, and also the Song of Moses later, if you could unravel the whole thing. And then you will see extended letters. These extended letters were to emphasize importance. If you had a passage here that was very important, and you need almost like Selah in the Psalms, you need to slow down here and really carefully read what is said here. They will extend letters to emphasize that. Then, over here, you will see where Genesis ends and Exodus begins. In fact, it might be right there. I put it in the wrong place. They use 4 lines as a break. And that means one book is ending and another book is beginning, because they weren't divided up into chapters or verses or anything. Sometime over here you can see it, and down here a couple times, they will compress, at the end of a line, they will compress the letters. Why? Now, they cannot touch. They will compress the letters for this reason. They not only did a grid from right to left, they did it from top to bottom at each column. So each line would start out exactly the same and end exactly the same. But they have no hyphens for words. And so sometimes the word would be too long to get in there. So they do one of 2 things. They would either compress the word so it end on the line like this, or just look down below it there. They will take the last letter of the word and extend it out to the line, and then start the next word on the next line so it all ends on the same line. Then you can be going through it and you'll find small letters. All of a sudden you have maybe one letter or two or three words together, real small print. Why? That was to say there's possibly a spelling error here. Even if the scribe thought there was spelling error, he could never change it. He could not change the text. So if he thought so, he would do it in small letters. And that means one of two things. Either there's a spelling error here or there's a very ominous reading. Be careful how you interpret this word or this passage. And then you'll come to large letters. And we have several them indicated with tabletops there. And you can see them here. A large letter, when you got to that, it says stop. This verse is very important. Or it would mean there's a possible variation here. That maybe there was something a little different here that maybe should be here. A variation, but they won't change it. They'll put in a large letter, and then they'll bring in the top scribes who would trace it back maybe 1,000, 2,000 years to see, is there a variation or not here? Whoever did that with any other literature of antiquity? No one. And then, after many large letters, you will see kind of blank spaces going along. Here's a blank space that doesn't end with a line. When it ends with a line, it means this is another important section. When it's within the text, it means for emphasis. This is very important what you're now going to read in the next line. And so they put a space in there. You see, they were not only careful to copy it accurately, to read it accurately, but they wanted you to interpret it accurately. You'll find some dots. Right along here is one. If I could unroll it more, there's some that have 5 dots above the words. And what a dot means, it's very unusual. It raises a question about the exactitude of the reading of that word or that phrase. The dot means be careful. You could make a mistake here by how you read this and how you... Who ever did that with other literature? No one, except the Jewish scribes. When they came to the name Elohim, go up to Elohim here, will you? Elohim, one of the names for God. It's really not, to the Jew, it's not a name for God. El or Elohim, it's a title. El means judge, Elohim means judgment. And they believe this is a title of God as a judge. We look at it as a name of God. But when they would come to this name, with see to the right, the letter that the red circle goes through, they would stop before that letter. They would leave the last letter of the word before the name for God blank. They'd put down their quill, ceremonially wash their hands, pick up a special quill, and then they would write the last letter of the word before the name for God. Why would they do that? The reason is, with a quill, it could blot, and it could run 2 letters together. Well, if it's just a regular word, they can scrape it off and correct it. If they can't correct it, they can't use a scroll. But with a name for God, if one letter touches the other and the quill happens to blot, they can't use it. They cannot erase it or use a scroll. So isn't that interesting? They would stop with a regular pen with next to the last letter, pick up a special quill, put it in ink, and then write the last letter. By that time, if it was going to blot, it was all done. And then they would write the name for God. Who ever did that with any other scripture or literature in history? Well, then, the tetragrammaton. I don't have PowerPoints in this. Zach, make sure I develop some graphics for this. The tetragrammaton, you've all heard that. Tetra, 4, grammaton, grammar, word, letter. Tetragrammaton is a name used for the name of God, Yahweh. It's always written out with 4 consonants. YV, oh boy, my mind just, YH or YVWH. Sometimes the H, it's the same as a V. So some is written YVHWH or YHWH. This is a name in Exodus 3 where God said to Moses said, who in the world can I say sent me? Nobody's going to believe this. They're going to think I'm crazy. He said, tell them I am sent you, Yahweh. The Jew believes this is a name for God. Now, this is interesting. They believe it's the first name for God. You don't pronounce it. Why? You are not on a first name basis with God. A Jew would never pronounce it, even today. Yahweh. So what they would often do is they would write in the consonants, maybe extra large letter or small, but in the synagogue, everybody knew it was Yahweh, but they would either say nothing or they'd use another name for God, Adonai. But everybody knew it was Yahweh, but they believe their lips are too dirty, too unclean to allow the breath, the very breath, to pronounce the name for God. You go to Jewish commentaries, and I've got some over here, I think, where they'll say the name for God in English, and it'll go G-D. They won't even write out G-O-D. It's G, even today, G-D. Because it's the most reverent, holy, sacred name for God that he revealed himself with, that shows his character and all. Well, then, sometimes they would write it in Aramaic, sometimes in Old Hebrew, according if it was with a Samaritan Pentateuch or what. Another name for this is the Torah, the Pentateuch, or the Law of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. But then they added vowels starting around 700, 900 A.D. They added vowels to the text. Why? One, Hebrew was no longer the basic language of the Jews in the cultures they lived. And they were starting to lose the ability to pronounce and read Hebrew because you all just run together. You'll see it. And second, I just lost my mind context here. The Jews were scattered throughout the whole world. And so after years, they lost the ability to pronounce and read the Hebrew text, just all run together in consonants. So the Masoretics came along, created the Masoretic text. In any of your textbooks or anything, it says MT, it means Masoretic text, by the Masoretic scribes. They added vowels. Well, when it came to the name Yahweh for God, they would write the consonants of Yahweh, but they added the vowels of another name for God, Adonai. And so here you look, it meant nothing. It was a meaningless word. Had the consonants of one name for God and the vowels of another name for God. But when they chanted it in the synagogue, everybody knew it was Yahweh, but they'd always say Adonai. Well, it was either Wycliffe or Tyndale. I got to look it up. They came along to translate into English. And they had enough problems in Greek to do it with a Septuagint. When it got to English, they hadn't realized what the Jews had done with the name Yahweh, adding the vowels another name for God. So here they come to this and they say, what does it mean? Yahweh, Adonai, Yahweh, Jehovah. That's where we got the name Jehovah, a misreading of Yahweh with the vowels of Adonai. I even tell my Jehovah Witness friends, even your name is wrong. But anyway, but that's how we got Jehovah in our text. Now, many texts are going back to Yahweh now that we understand what happened. But it was through a misreading of the consonants of one name for God and the vowels of the other because they so reverenced the Scriptures. Then they finished the text. 72 feet long, took over 1 year just to copy it. I can never do that. I stand in a microwave and say, hurry up. The patience, they always sat alone, and if they're writing the name for God and a king walks in, they literally could not recognize the presence of the king until they totally finished writing the name for God. Here they are, 304,805 letters, 79,000 plus words. How do they know they have an accurate text? What would you do? If you were God, you wanted humans to know you have an accurate text, that what you have is what was written down. What would you do? You know what they did? Whoops, I lost my screen here. They would go back up to 3 different times. They bring in professional scribes. It took a number of months for the 3 of them to do it. One would start out, would count every single letter. They knew exactly right down there what was the center letter in Leviticus 11:42. They had to count out 152,402 letters. If the next letter was not that letter, they couldn't use the text. No one's ever done that. And then when they had the center letter, they had to count all the way to the end of the scroll. Why? To find out if anyone had added or left out one single letter out of 304,805 letters. Folks, no one ever did that to any other scripture, literature, anything in history. And if they couldn't find what letter was left out or added, they could never use the scroll. Over a year in process, plus 3 to 4 months preparing the skins, everything else before, and then they first did the parchments, the sheets, and then they sewed them together after they had copied everything. Well, then they'd go back and count every single word. And they knew that in Leviticus 13:33 is the middle word. They would count out 39,923 words. And if the next word was not the known center word, they couldn't use the text. And then they would start with that and go to the end again and count out 39,923 words. Oh. We can hold it in our hands and say what we have is what was written down. You see why this is so important to me? When I set out to write evidence that demands a verdict, now called the new evidence, with all the updates with evidence and everything, I set out to write that against Christianity. Because I believe Christians had 2 brains. One was lost and was out looking for it. I believed they were walking idiots. I'd met some. And one thing I did, I couldn't read in Hebrew or Greek. I flew to the British Museum, to Oxford, to Cambridge, the Louvre and others, where they had many of the scrolls and the manuscripts. But I asked the experts to come in, and boy, I found they were always willing to help you. And I had all these questions because I thought what you had before you was a farce. Totally changed everything. And as these experts, I'd ask them questions, they started to say what they did, how they did this, and doubt started to come into my mind. And after I trusted Christ, after I returned to the university, I said, Lord, if ever I can afford a scroll, I can't afford this scroll, it's so valuable. The guy didn't know what he had, and I didn't think I had to tell him. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm going to live with it. He was so excited, he probably thought he took me to the cleaners. If he saw the appraisal of it, he would die. I paid about 1/50th or 1/100th of what it's worth, and it could be sold for. But I always wanted to own one, to use it to demonstrate what took part of my thinking and started to reverse it. Literal, physical evidence. There's many, many other things about this scroll. I mean, I just touched on the top of it. I'm going to close 5 minutes early. If you want to come up and look at it, take pictures. I ask you this. Absolutely no food, no water. No Bibles, no purses. You cannot believe. I say this. 2 women have set their purses right down in the text to be able to take the magnifying glass, look closer. I have had Christians, I don't know how many, will place their Bibles down on it. You don't do that, folks. Do not please touch the text. You can touch the margins, but not the text. Don't believe me? Just look at your iPad when it's turned off and see how filthy that is. That's what you do to the text with the oils on your hands and not even know it. And so I ask you not to bring any purses, any Bibles, anything with you, and no food. One pastor the other day ignored that, came up with a glass of water. Just as he approached it, a man hit his elbow, and he spilled it. Oh, he looked at it and turned around and walked out of the church. That's why nobody will illustrate it like this, but it's mine. I own it, so I can do with it what I want, but I am responsible to take care of it and then to pass it on to my son. And then I have two of these. I pick another one up December 5th. One is going to come to Oklahoma Wesleyan University. The other is going to Biola. Can I mention that here? Yeah. But I want Oklahoma Wesleyan to be a depository of one of my scrolls. But you can come up and look at it. I had never touched the scroll. Even when I was going over to refute it all, they were behind cases and everything, and you couldn't touch it, and you had to stand way back. You can walk right up to it. But I'm trusting you. I only know one other person who will ever do this in the world. So thank you for letting me share some of the exciting things about one of the great artifacts of history that is physical evidence that what we have is what was written down. There's books out there that can help you. 77 difficult questions. I wrote the difficult question I've ever been asked in university. I wrote them out in the 8th grade level, totally documented. And much of what I said here is in new evidence. Thank you very much. God bless.